Hi, I'm Dr. Scott.
And I'm Dr. Shiloh.
And this is LA Not So Confidential, the forensic psychology and true crime podcast.
Each week, we explore the intersection of psychology, the criminal justice system, and entertainment.
And today, our episode is on the forensic psych topic of obsessive compulsive disorder.
Welcome back, everyone. Happy July, Dr. Scott.
Happy July. Thank you.
What are you doing with yourself these days?
It's, we're still in an area, you and I, for most people that listen, that know you and I live in different parts of Southern California and the greater Los Angeles area, kind of.
Yeah.
But I'm in an area that still gets the marine layer that comes in all through this part of the summer. So the mornings are humid and foggy. And then by noon, it burns off with like, oh my God, my skin is being lasered off my body. Where you just get that all day.
Not in a good way, which we like getting things lasered off our bodies. But
I do.
Yeah, it's nonstop for me, but I'm okay with that. You know, days in the pool and trying to find ways to stay cool. Also, how to occupy my time now that the Karen retrial is done. Well, at least for now. I mean,
what is your purpose in life?
What is my purpose in life?
You're basically a desert lizard with no purpose right now.
That's it. I know. I'm actually okay with it. That was sucking way too much of my time.
It's fascinating, though. I mean, it's really just such a crap show.
It was,
but fascinating to me.
It's so, I think that's what I come back to. And we have ranted more about this on our shrink wraps. So our Patreon members are up to speed. But, it's just awful to come to no resolution because John O'Keefe's family have nothing and there's no justice for him. And they may have to go through all of this absolutely over again. And I think some changes will be made. Certainly the Commonwealth of Massachusetts said they're going to retry it, but I think both sides will make some changes. It'll probably be a shorter trial, but also it again, like absolutely fascinating from a legal criminal justice perspective and psychological perspective that I don't think the Commonwealth proved their case. So it really should have come away as a mistrial or not guilty. So it played out the way that it probably should with our system here, but anyway.
Well, we should talk some more about it. I mean, there's some things that came up for me and I wasn't in the depth that you were, but in our next shrink wrap, there's a couple of points I've scribbled out that we can talk about. But let's talk about the last episode that we did, which is so weird because, we're coming off a 2-year run of weekly episodes. Now we're back to 2 times a month. So we have more time to really go in depth. But it is like, when was our last episode?
Totally.
Right? So in our last episode, we did a follow-up on the delusional diagnosis disorder presentation of folie à deux, also known as shared psychotic disorder or the madness of two. And this really troubling disorder involves the sharing or transmission of delusions, both bizarre and non-bizarre, from one individual to another individual. And while some very striking examples of folie à deux have emerged in popular culture over the past couple of decades, we covered the significant levels of this disorder in the Chad and Lori Daybell crimes, the perpetrators of the Slender Man attempted murder, and the horrific child abuse that took place in the home of Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt. So check it out when you get a moment. There's been a lot of discussion and buzz about this, and I can already tell you that once all these things get settled, there's going to be even more discussion about this. So this is a great primer for anyone out there that is interested in seeing how these crimes emerge.
And that was a lot of heavy stuff to go back and revisit. And I know when we came back from our hiatus, we did an updates episode, and this one we really felt like needed its own update because of these cases finally coming to an end, so we could speak about them a little bit more. But as for today, something not so heavy and something not with such an obvious crossover with crime and criminal behavior, which is a good thing, but I think very worthy of some attention just because this tends to be one of those terms that we throw around a lot. And we've all said it or heard it, right? I'm so OCD. But not only is this another way in which we water down yet another disorder that real people really struggle with.
Truly struggle with.
Oh my gosh, yes. But it also suggests that obsessive compulsive disorder only pertains to being overly neat or having to have things just so. And we're going to learn today there's so much more to it.
Thank you for making that point, too. We really just need to stop doing
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
I mean, like
Thank
we
you.
as a collective, and I myself have been guilty of it, even fully into the career that I'm inhabiting right now. Let's not use mental health diagnoses to describe some sort of transient emotional state that we're feeling when there are people out there that are really challenged by the everyday managing of these conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that OCD has been really one of the most mysterious, and when I finally figure out what it is with my clients, frustrating conditions that I've treated. And when I say treated, I'm kind of doing that parallel while they're getting some in-depth courses of treatment at like an OCD center. So, but it really.
And thank goodness for those centers. Like I'm telling you, those centers, these are clinicians and that is their specialty. And I'm referring out now. I go, like, look, you come back to me when we can get back on track with life goals and this and this. But like these people are the experts that can relieve you of symptoms that I'm not trained to.
Yeah, exactly. And it, it really has this like sneaky nature about it that allows it to present in really countless ways, sometimes remaining dormant for long periods of time before popping up again and then latching on to another theme. We're going to talk about themes a lot today as well. A unifying feature across all manifestations is really this pervasive sense of doubt, often accompanied by spirals of just intolerable uncertainty. OCD is so much more than having to have your desk tidy, and we hope that this episode brings a new appreciation to the way this disorder really impacts the daily functioning of those who are affected. So today we're going to be mentioning some details of a brutal murder, and there is brief mention of a criminal case involving child sexual abuse images. Otherwise, I would say just listen with care if discussions of OCD are potentially activating to your own diagnosis, and, use your own best judgment about moving forward with this episode.
So we sometimes think of looking at diagnoses in our current profession, where we are with research. We think of things more holistically, and I don't mean holistically like, eating more fiber in your diet. I mean, holistically, like looking at sort of a multi-dimensional presentation. And OCD is an anxiety disorder, and anxiety disorders themselves can be incredibly pervasive. And like you said, Dr. Shiloh, incredibly sneaky. I like to use, especially in my practice when I'm working, I do have some specialty in generalized anxiety disorder and panic disorder and related disorders, but not so much OCD. And one of the things that I'll explain to my clients is just how insidious anxiety is, because anxiety is that doubt that you described poking at the back of your brain, and you're using all of your tools to stay on top of it, all of your coping skills. And then right when you get to a place of balance and centeredness, and that voice goes, but what if?
Yeah.
Right? Yep. Yeah. And it's really a challenge for people. Obsessive compulsive disorder itself, for a textbook definition, is a long-lasting anxiety disorder in which a person experiences uncontrollable and recurring thoughts. Those thoughts are known as obsessions. And the individual engages in repetitive behaviors, and those repetitive behaviors are what we call compulsions. So these two things combined together, the individual feels driven to perform in order to reduce anxiety or achieve a sense of completeness. And people with OCD have very time-consuming symptoms that can cause significant levels of distress and interfere with their daily lives. And again, it's not a one-size-fits-all diagnosis. Some people can have predominant obsessions, or they can have predominant compulsions, or some can fade out while others move forward, and that can be transient in itself. So that's what Dr. Shiloh was talking about earlier, is it can be really difficult to get a true diagnosis with this. Thankfully, it's relatively rare. Only an estimated 1.2% of U.S. adults have OCD in the past year. And the prevalence of OCD was higher for females, which was 1.8%, than it was for males, which was 0.5%. It typically manifests before the age of 30. It follows a long and chronic course and presents similar symptoms across different cultures and socioeconomic classes. It frequently occurs with other disorders, sort of other disorders within that anxiety holistic model, as well as all of the mood disorders, substance use, tic, and impulse control disorders. So it's interesting that after all the years that we've been doing this, we're finally getting to OCD, which is just so prevalent in the community. I mean, yes, I say it's rare, but rare is a relative term, right? When it's 1.2% of US adults.
Yeah. When you're thinking about the population in general, when you then start to think of people who self-refer for treatment, then it's going to be a little bit more prevalent because these people know that they need help and assistance and support. So they're definitely.
But what about the people who have no insight, or the people that think of it, oh, well, that's a quirk, or this is just the way I am, and never seek help? It's very sad.
It is. So the exact causes of OCD are unknown. However, there are identified risk factors that increase the chances of developing the disorder. So one of those is genetic. Research indicates that individuals with a first-degree relative, so remember, that's a parent or a sibling who has OCD, are at higher risk of developing the disorder themselves. And while no single gene or group of genes has been conclusively linked to OCD yet, ongoing studies continue to explore these genetic factors that are associated with the condition. So I'm sure we will learn more on that front. Separately from genetics is just other biological basis. So brain imaging studies have revealed that individuals with OCD often exhibit differences in the frontal cortex and the subcortical structures, which are crucial for controlling behavior and emotional responses. Researchers have also identified that various brain areas, networks, and biological processes significantly influence obsessive thoughts, compulsive behaviors, and really like all of the fear and anxiety that's related. Ongoing research aims to deepen the understanding of the connection between OCD symptoms and specific brain regions, which again, we'll learn more in the future, I'm sure. And that's going to really help in developing and refining treatments that can target these areas. And then we have temperament. So that's just how this is sort of categorized. So some research has found that the people who exhibit more reserved behaviors and experience negative emotions and who showed symptoms of anxiety and depression as children are more likely to develop OCD. So that's really interesting. And then they also cite as a risk factor childhood trauma. So some studies out there have found a link between childhood trauma and OCD symptoms. However, further research is definitely needed to really fully understand the relationship between the two.
So there are models that view OCD through a cognitive behavioral lens, and they view obsessions as misinterpreted threats that trigger anxiety. And then the individuals attempt to reduce that anxiety through engaging in these compulsive rituals. But these rituals prevent individuals from becoming accustomed to the obsessions and recognizing their harmlessness. Like they're just unable to see that it's just this thing that's triggering them rather than being representative of everything falling apart, of like the world, kind of cracking. I remember one person explaining it to me years and years and years ago, saying, I just feel like if I don't take care of this, the entire world will fall apart.
Wow.
My whole world will fall apart. And I was like, well, do you feel like you will die? Or is it going to end your life? And he goes, well, that would be the easiest part, but it's everything. It's going to affect my family. It's going to affect everything. Yeah, it's completely overwhelming. So the treatment is designed to focus on challenging those beliefs and using behavioral exposure to help those individuals habituate to their fears and then extinguish the fear associated with that obsession. But then you also have research that shows strong evidence for a neurobiological basis of OCD, indicating that clients exhibited altered functioning in the cognitive domains, such as memory, attention, decision-making. But researchers have struggled to explain how these cognitive deficits lead to specific OCD symptoms. So again, as we're always discovering in our field, as we get more and more neurological information over the years, you can end up with a particular diagnosis, but two people can have a completely different foundation and starting point
Sure.
from how they got there.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting because there's an emerging theory that OCD is caused by general deficits in the individual's ability to access internal states. So the authors of this paper and that have kind of posited this theory say, and it's from 2023, so this is very, very recent, but they suggest that individuals with OCD struggle to access their feelings and their emotions, their preferences, and their motivations. And then to compensate for this introspective deficit, if you will, they engage in rigid rituals as proxies. So according to this model, individuals with obsessional doubts become trapped in a cycle of repeatedly seeking and verifying these proxies. So I know that's really into the weeds, but an example of this would be if an individual couldn't access a sense of satisfaction regarding the cleanliness of their hands, right? They just don't think that it has gotten to the level where it's clean enough. They might rely on a rule like, okay, I'm going to wash my hand until I use up an entire bar of soap, or wash each finger 10 times, rather than just like the rest of us would give it several seconds and then go, okay, yeah, that seems like good enough, right? So they have to, it's like they don't trust their internal instincts. They have to have a thing to kind of measure it by.
So interesting. There's this term called alexithymia that we use in diagnosis, which is the inability to name your feelings.
Right.
And there's a lot of controversy about, well, why are guys so bad at it? And
yes.
So in our earlier statement about why the percentage rates for OCD are much higher in men, I cannot help but think that it's a part of it is alexithymia sometimes can be fixed by working with a feeling wheel. Like, hey,
oh, totally.
Look, there's actually names for what you're feeling. So before we get down this rabbit hole of all these interventions and treatment, let's figure out and put to words what it is you're experiencing.
Well,
right?
Okay. So yes, you were like reading my mind right now of linking some of that together. But did you say that the rates were higher for men? Because they were actually lower for men. It was 0.5% for men.
Oh, no, I got it wrong then.
So
I thought they were higher.
So
what do you think that's about?
I was thinking like, I don't know about this theory because I would expect to see higher rates in men if this theory was true, because I think, women are pretty good at accessing their internal states. So I don't know. I think that was a conundrum for me. But I'm glad you brought up that point because I was going to bring it up anyway.
Thank you for the correction, because now I'm really wondering, like, is that then, do we have lower rates of reported issues with men or diagnosis with men because they can't even get to a place where they seek help?
Sure.
If you're not part of the pool of people being asked, does it ever get named? It makes me think I can't remember his name, but there was a really famous game show host, and it's not Pat Sajak because Pat Sajak is still around.
Yeah.
But it was a game show host that was around for decades.
Was it Alex?
Very, very
Alex
successful. No, it wasn't Alex Trebek. This was a game show host that ended his life because his OCD was so overwhelming. And when it was all said and done and people came forward with his story after his passing, they talked about how his was so severe. And you never saw it because he was great on camera, would do that sort of, when they do game shows, it's like 3 or 4 days of filming and they do, 10 episodes a day or something.
Yeah.
And he was holding it together, but his home life apparently was really just quite brutal. So yeah, that's interesting. Hopefully we can get some more accurate stats. But again, I'm all about the feeling wheel. I use it
Same. I know.
in my practice all the time. It's like I throw the pillow at them across the room. You're like, look at the feeling wheel. Tell me what you're feeling. So before we move on with OCD, we want to differentiate OCD from OCPD, which is Obsessive Compulsive Personality Disorder. We know the DSM is so freaking confusing. They are very different things, although they can seem very similar at times. So the most notable characteristic of Obsessive Compulsive Personality Disorder is a pervasive preoccupation with order, perfectionism, control, and specific ways of doing things. So this need to present these behaviors in this way make it really difficult to complete tasks, and they can cause issues with relationships. So in the real world, this might look like having an excessive devotion to work and productivity. I can relate to that. I wish I could undo that sometimes, because it's a vicious cycle of like incredible production and then guilt for not producing anything. It's crazy. But the results are that people neglect things like hobbies, legitimate coping skills that bring them a quality of life that's higher, or they end up spending less time with their loved ones, so there's this priority that gets switched. They can also be rigid and stubborn in their beliefs and their way of doing things. I think many of us have probably had bosses who can be quite competent, and they raise to their level of incompetence and then sort of make everybody underneath them miserable with their micromanaging, right? They are really unwilling to compromise many times. They have difficulty working with others or delegating tasks unless they agree to do things exactly as the person wants. Been there, done that, been on both sides of that, actually. So the individuals can frequently become overly fixated on a single idea, task, or belief, like just hyper focusing and not letting it go. And they tend to perceive everything as black and white. So what we call dichotomous thinking. It's not tied to anxiety or performing actions to relieve anxiety like in OCD, though. Another way to think about it is that they're basically the opposite of each other. An individual with OCD has very specific thoughts that are experienced as unwanted, intrusive, anxiety-provoking, but those with OCPD, Obsessive Compulsive Personality Disorder, include thoughts on which they may experience as wanted, and they're normal for me, and they're not at all anxiety-provoking. In fact, my anxiety would be less if everybody would just get on program with the way I'm telling them to do things, right? That's kind of
this
the drive
really
for it.
might be the one that I relate to more.
Well, let's be careful.
I'm not
Let's don't
throw it
overdiagnose.
around. I'm just
But I
gonna
could say I've had some flavors of that in my
husband would probably
day-to-day
say
life.
yes, absolutely.
So OCPD can be divided into several subcategories. Each one of them highlights different aspects of the condition. One that it does bring people to therapy quite often is OCRPD, which is Obsessive Compulsive Relational Personality Disorder. And it's really quite a challenge because it emphasizes the impact of OCPD traits on interpersonal relationships, and individuals just can often present with rigid perfectionism, control, and very much a preoccupation with orderliness within their personal and professional interactions. Of course, you can already tell this is going to lead to strained relationships because they have these unrealistic standards that they impose on the relationship, and that the other can just struggle to meet while they're struggling to delegate or compromise. OCPD personality disorder people really have trouble delegating. Oh, I'll just do it myself. Let me just do it myself because then I'll be able to do it right. There are other parts, subcategories that will focus on specific areas like workaholism, where the obsession with productivity and efficiency dominates, or perfectionism, which is just crippling. Perfectionism is so crippling, where there's just this relentless pursuit of flawlessness, and it impairs daily functioning. So these subcategories help us in understanding the varied manifestations of OCPD and guide more tailored therapeutic approaches. There's also some talk about an overlap of how it can present as narcissism. So we'll probably be looping around at some point to another episode about the intersection of crime and OCPD. But back to OCD.
Yes. All right, so let's get into some of the themes that OCD likes to revolve around. First, what might come to mind for most of you is contamination OCD. So this typically refers to sufferers who are concerned that one item that they see as unacceptably unclean will cause other things to become unclean, and that they are responsible for making sure this does not occur. Additionally, this is sometimes understood as a form of OCD in which the primary focus isn't on germs or dirt or cleanliness, but on the feeling of disgust experienced when exposed to certain stimuli. So some of the typical triggers for contamination OCD can include items used by the public, like door handles or hand railings, as well as fecal matter, including things that are near fecal matter, like toilets. Blood is another one, or anything that could be touched by blood, like a Band-Aid or an entire medical setting, as well as other body fluids, poison or anything that's perceived as poisonous, which, I mean, that could include household cleaning products, medicine, expired food, or even environmental contaminants and chemicals. So the list is sort of unending, unfortunately. And the compulsions or actions found in contamination OCD can include washing and cleaning rituals, which can be a matter of frequency or needing to wash in a very specific, almost ritualized way. We see avoidance of things viewed as contaminated or poisonous or unclean. They can also engage in a mental review, which is also known sometimes as memory hoarding, where you go through an exhaustive list of, did I touch anything unclean today? And kind of walking through step by step of the day. So, I mean, I think, just with this example of this thing, we're starting to see how absolutely consuming it is to the person's thoughts. Because if you're having to walk around thinking, gosh, did I have contact with any contaminants? And was my washing ritual properly executed? I mean, that's debilitating in and of itself. They're also, a very common thing that they do is seek reassurance from others or some sort of reassurance to make sure they haven't been exposed to a contaminant. They might even go online and seek reassurance in the form of researching that feared contaminant. I would say just at the top here, as we're getting into this first theme, that the mental reviews, the seeking reassurance, the avoidance of the stimuli are common for all forms of OCD. So no matter what theme we're talking about here today, know that each type will probably involve that level of burden to the person that's dealing with it. I just wanted to talk about it with contamination OCD as an example, because I think it's easy to kind of picture in your head of what that might look like for them.
Another very common theme of OCD is called responsibility or checking OCD. So checking is a behavioral response to a thought, feeling, or physical sensation that involves a heightened sense of responsibility. Therefore, the obsession is a fear of being irresponsible, and the compulsion is to check that no irresponsible action took place in real life. Already, just that sentence right there clues you in to how difficult and challenging this can be for an individual with this diagnosis, because the urge to check is a drive for a certainty that something has not been left in such a state that will then cause future problems or catastrophe. So it's the individual is literally, well, not literally, but virtually unstuck in time as far as how their brain is functioning, because there's so much concentration and thinking about what can possibly happen as a result of the mistakes or the recklessness that they have imagined about themselves. Some common behaviors associated with checking OCD can be making sure that lockable items have been truly locked, doors, safes, garage doors, etc. It could also be associated with appliances being left on in the house, or that other safety measures have not been properly secured or maintained, like parking brakes, anything to do with the car. I have had a moment like that where I got stuck. Did I lock the car? Did I lock the car? Did I lock the car?
Yeah.
But I'm not going to say that my experience in that moment was anything like the true diagnoses. Something else that falls in this category is the fear that a correspondence was improperly sent or contained wrong information, like letters or digital correspondence. I would say in me, it's like, did I piss that person off? Why haven't they responded back?
Like, we're all mad here. At me?
Right.
What did I do? No.
That was a great meme. Thank you.
The example I use on this one is if someone is fearful that they didn't close the garage after you leave your house. I mean, we all think that, right? Like, how many times do I ask my husband when we leave, did I close the garage door? Right. Now we have an app that shows us if it's closed or not. But for someone with OCD, this would be, okay, I'm going to watch the garage door close. I'm going to leave. I'm on my way to work. I get to the end of the street. Did I close the garage door? And then they turn around, go back, see it, and leave for work. And then that questioning comes up again and again. So at this point, we're not talking about just kind of crazy making thoughts, but they're going to be late for work. You know, again, we could see how this could impact relationships. what this stress would start to do to your health. I mean, really, when we talk about the distress that people need to feel to be diagnosed with something, this has such a foot in all of those different areas for sure, where we could see consequences of it. So we also have the category that people tend to joke about or use in everyday vernacular when we say OCD, and that's the category of, quote, just right OCD. This deals primarily with the obsessive fear that something is not precisely as it should be, not symmetrical, not organized correctly, or imperfect in some discomforting way. This is a little tricky because essentially all forms of OCD involve strategies for feeling unright. However, most treatment programs are going to categorize this as its own form because triggers can kind of be all over the place. So what that looks like in terms of compulsions is typically they are fixing objects so that they look right or feel right in a given space, repeating a behavior that has been done on one side on the other side, like tapping your right leg after noticing that you've tapped your left leg. Or maybe it's repeating a behavior just again to quote unquote feel right. So this could be walking through a doorway or shutting a drawer and then checking behaviors related to see if things appear as if you feel they should be, like placing pillows on a sofa to make sure they're in the perfect position. So this has a lot of different things that can present as just right OCD in terms of the actual compulsions that people see. We have an idea of what the thoughts are, but again, this can be someone, trying to make something look perfect, or again, they're going to maybe be doing some motions or actions or behaviors that look a little bizarre because they're trying to even it out.
Harm OCD centers on unwanted intrusive thoughts about violence or aggressive actions, and this can involve fears of harming others or harming oneself. The fear of self-harm is distinct from actual suicidal behaviors, ideations, or other self-harm actions like cutting. Very clear here, not the same thing. Similarly, the fear of dying by suicide differs from actual suicidal ideation. The former involves an obsessive fear of losing control due to an unwanted intrusive thought, while the latter concerns a desire to end one's life. One of the great examples I like to use about this for people that don't have OCD, but there's a saying called, it's in French. It's the call of the void. It's very elegant in French, and I'm blanking on what the name is, but it's that experience when people are on a bridge or on a high place, and there's an intrusive thought that says, what if I just jumped off?
Oh, yeah.
And it's not what if I fell, it's what if I actually engaged in behavior that was going to hurt me.
Right.
So it's been talked about by existential philosophers for,
without wanting to die.
Now. Right. But it's an intrusive thought. And most people's reaction is, where the fuck did that come from?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So obsessions associated with harm OCD include the fear of suddenly snapping. And although we say no one ever snaps, but you could have the fear of snapping and then violently attacking another person or yourself. It can also include the fear of harming a loved one, the fear of failing to respond to a violent thought appropriately, or the fear of losing consciousness and committing violent acts that you won't then remember. It can also include the fear of accidentally causing harm to somebody else. Typically, compulsions associated with harm OCD include avoidance of people, avoidance of places, situations, and even the media, which can then trigger unwanted thoughts of harm. Individuals that struggle with this form of OCD also tend to seek reassurance that they did not or would not do a terrible thing. They can then also engage in compulsive flooding, which is when they are trying to force themselves to imagine violent acts in an attempt to prove that they are disgusted by them and then would not do them. That's not a really good coping skill because it's actually just going to pour fuel on the fire. We also see compulsive prayer or magic rituals, which tend to be a way that people respond to those unwanted thoughts, and those in themselves may be culturally bound as well. They may even research violent offenders and compare and contrast themselves. That's a really, really important point.
Yep.
Because one of the things that we do in risk assessment is that when we go in and we look at the individual's belongings or what their behaviors are, we're getting collateral information from friends and family, and they'll say, oh, he was obsessed with serial killers or she was obsessed with serial killers. that doesn't always mean the same thing.
No, definitely
Right.
not. And that gets a little bit more complicated because there's a subsection of Harm OCD, which is specifically characterized by obsessions about becoming a serial killer or having similar traits to one. Individuals may experience violent images or fears of having harmed others, though they do not want to hurt anyone. So again, like the suicide, they don't wish to die by suicide. They're having these intrusive thoughts. They struggle with uncertainty about their potential for harm, and someone who's experiencing serial killer themes in Harm OCD experiences obsessions in terms of those intrusive thoughts, images, doubts, or urges that cause them, again, very significant distress and anxiety. Their compulsions are actions, either mental or physical, that serve to neutralize uncertainty or worry or prevent a feared outcome. So again, probably a lot of avoidance. Triggers for their OCD can be seeing weapons, hearing about crimes, watching the news or crime documentaries, even scary or horror movies, being alone with someone they might see as a risk. Another trigger could be becoming angry or upset. And then again, that's when they fear that they might snap or lose control, or even being around crowds or people that they consider vulnerable, because that's what this narrative is trying to make them believe.
It's almost, it feels like, and not to make a joke, I'm just actually sort of drawing a parallel of people that are trying to figure out why they're experiencing a particular state or a particular set of circumstances. So they go and take an online test.
Right.
And now, that being said, there are some really good online free tests that are out there. Some of them for ADHD can be great, but you can overdo it. You can misinterpret what you're being asked. So it's like, well, let me expose myself to this and see if I meet any of these criteria. Like, well, I wasn't raised like Dahmer, so maybe I'm not like him.
Yeah.
So another form, which is very concerning, is called sexual orientation OCD, and it's also known as SOOCD, or previously homosexual OCD. Very outdated term. Sounds so clinical. And now, homosexual is still used as a slur by older adults here in the US. And sexual orientation OCD affects around 8% of OCD sufferers currently obsessing about sexual orientation, and about 12% have experienced these obsessions at some point in their lives. So this confusion is then further compounded because the feared orientation is not seen by that individual as inherently bad. They're not worried about being gay or being around gay people, but they're guilty about how they might feel about it.
Yes.
So it's like inventing something else to be worried about,
Yeah.
right? So other common obsessions and sexual orientations, OCD, are the fear of living in denial of their sexual orientation, fear that the presence of thoughts or feelings or sensations contrary to their original orientation means that they're now defined by another orientation, or fear that others see them as being a different orientation, or fear that life situations are indicators of orientation issues like past troubled relationships. What we see in terms of compulsions and SOOCD are avoidance of a wide variety of triggers, including certain types of clothing, but also things as specific as avoiding gay neighborhoods or gay media content. They may even physically check their body parts to see if they are sexually aroused in the presence of someone of the same sex. It makes me think of a good friend of mine who is a very well-known wardrobe designer, costume supervisor for film and television. It's been doing it for years, and worked with an actor, very, very famous actor to this day, who's been around also for decades. Nicest person in the world, nice to his co-stars, has not a problem with, the friends in his life who are gay. He is obsessive about being seen as gay. Does this shirt make me look gay? Should I wear this? Does this make me look gay? And like that, it just really, really challenging.
Interesting.
To costume that person.
To costume them, to be their stylist. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, and then go, but
Okay.
I don't have a problem with gay people, but does this make me look gay? So it's very interesting.
Yes. Very telling. So Dr. Joe Court, he's an LMSW and certified sex therapist who has treated this in his private practice. Someone that I've taken classes from. His
very well known
book on Couples therapy for LGBTQ couples is fantastic. Highly recommend. So he writes in an article for Psychology Today where he says this, quote, "Such a man may constantly think about whether the way he walks is too girly. He may worry that he appears to be gay if he crosses his legs at the knee like a woman when sitting down rather than having the typical man spread. He may even avoid being alone with other men for fear of being attracted to them. Like those with OCD, he may exhibit the same kind of repetitious behaviors, such as sitting and standing over and over again to see if they appear gay in the way that he does it." So Dr. Court goes on to talk about how he has treated clients who will sometimes go to extreme lengths, such as having sex with men even though they're not gay or bisexual, which typically just leaves them feeling unsatisfied and uncomfortable afterwards. But then, since this is an anxiety-driven obsessive compulsive disorder, their thoughts get them into this loop where they may decide that they just chose the wrong man, or that they may even have erectile dysfunction because they couldn't remain erect. So they repeat the same behavior only to have confusing results while these cognitive distortions are being formed along the way. Yeah.
Well, and on top of that, even more concerning is a condition called pedophilia themed OCD. And as you can imagine, this is going to be very troubling. The thoughts of being attracted to or being a predator of children can, of course, be overwhelmingly debilitating and absolutely abhorrent to an individual. These thoughts often cause intense anxiety and other physical symptoms, and the fear of disclosing them, of course, as you can imagine, can be quite severe. So finding a suitable specialist for treatment can be very difficult, and individuals usually hesitate to confide in friends or family about their struggles with these unwanted, intrusive thoughts because they fear misinterpretation and judgment, and rightly so, because you can imagine how confiding to the wrong person about this bizarre fear you're having can be completely misinterpreted and blown out of proportion. To be clear, this is similar to the Harm OCD. The person does not want to do this, but questions, am I a pedophile because of XYZ, these other situations? Yeah. So POCD obsessions typically involve thoughts around the fear of snapping and becoming a pedophile, the fear of touching a child inappropriately, the fear that a past behavior or action, whether it be accidentally brush against a child or age-appropriate sexual play as a child, now makes them a pedophile. Fear of developing a desire to have sex with children because of the intrusive thoughts, and the compulsions associated with POCD include avoiding all places where children are present, avoiding all contact with children, including their own, and even delegating childcare responsibilities to someone else.
That sounds awful. I mean, what a struggle.
It really
Where
does.
do you
That is
go?
like incredibly profound. And who do you confide to? And it has nothing to do with reality.
No.
It has to do with the fear of something that is imagined.
Right. Yeah. It's just amazing how OCD can latch onto these different themes and can jump all around. I mean, you can have someone who struggled with pedophilia OCD and then maybe has this next one. OCD can latch onto relationship themes as well. So this is present when there's a difficulty in tolerating uncertainty about the quality of a relationship and or the genuineness of your feelings about another person. This doubt seeps into their thinking patterns in a really insidious way and just chips away at the very concept of love and fidelity. The mindfulness workbook for OCD describes it as, quote, "You feel as if you're in a double bind where your primary source of comfort and security in the world becomes your primary source of distress," unquote. So the obsessive fears that we see in relationship-themed OCD include thoughts like, what if I don't really love my significant other? What if the relationship is going to fail and I need to get out now? Or what if I would be a much better match with someone else? Or maybe something like, what if I'm not as attracted to my partner as I should be, etc. I mean, the questioning can just sort of be unending. Typical compulsions for this type of OCD include, again, mental reviews of everything pertaining to the relationship and compulsive confessing of doubts about the relationship. They also tend to seek reassurance from their partner and others, as well as avoiding situations that trigger relationship obsessions, like trying not to notice that other attractive people are out there in the world, or not engaging in conversations about sex or relationships at all.
So, scrupulosity OCD tends to target people who place a high value on philosophy, morality, religious doctrine, ethics, or social rules in society in general. Most often, it revolves around religious and moral obsessions. So, that's where the majority of the research is focused. Individuals with moral scrupulosity focus primarily on very black and white concepts of absolute rightness and absolute wrongness in their thoughts and their behaviors. Those with religious scrupulosity focus primarily on the idea that they are failing to adhere to the rules or intents of their particular religion. Therefore, some of the obsessions for religious scrupulosity can be thoughts of, I'm interpreting the scripture of my religious book incorrectly, or I'm failing to follow a religious tenet or law exactly the right way. And these individuals may also struggle with thoughts of, I don't feel like I have the right amount of faith. And then this could result in repetitive or rigid ritualized prayer, exaggerated religious practices, or avoiding people, places, or things associated with other religions. Since moral scrupulosity focuses more on fear or guilt or punishment from society, common obsessions include, I am inherently a bad person, I must never offend anyone, and I must avoid all selfish acts. The first thing when you put this together for me to read, because this is the way we work, we simultaneously work on episodes together. Yeah. It immediately took me back to one of the 19 and counting episodes about the Dugars.
Oh, really?
Because they practice a very, 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 very strict sect of evangelical Christianity, where young women in the family and the girls not allowed to wear pants, not aware about, it's the scrupulosity focuses on being modest and dressing appropriately. So they all wore long skirts all through childhood, never wore pants. And then they had a code when they're walking down the street with their brothers. If they encounter another female who was dressing in a manner that was not modest to their standards, they would use a code word and they would say Nike. And that would be the code word to their brothers to look down at their shoes while they're walking, so that they would not look and therefore commit sin by lusting or coveting this stranger that's walking past them. Can you even imagine? I mean, well, we've also seen some of that fallout in that family over the years from a lot of problems and a lot of recovery and a lot of hope and healing. I have great hopes for many of the daughters who are coming forward and being quite strong in their recovery from their upbringing. But look at that scrupulosity and how it emerged in one of the brothers who is doing a very long prison sentence.
Yeah,
for
I think
images collected.
I think that would be really difficult to, well, maybe not so difficult to parse out. I think from just looking at it, you'd go, oh my gosh, does this form of OCD fit, some of these extreme religious sects that we see? And again, remember, if they're not in distress about it, if the distress is just like, oh gosh, okay, I have to do better and I want to do better and I know there's a reason for this, then that's not what we're talking about here. That's not the OCD, right? If you
that's a practice. That is like a practice devotion, that verges on a compulsion.
Yes,
right?
Yes. We could maybe say it's a compulsive behavior, but the cognitive piece might not be there. But could you imagine someone with this type of OCD inside one of those religious organizations? How would they ever get the help? How would they even know which way was up?
Right. Or the idea of a client coming to you and saying, I'm really, really in love with my fiance, but I'm just so afraid that I'm not going to be attracted to him in 10 years.
I mean,
or whether it's male or female, heterosexual or gay, same-sex relationship, those kind of questions. And then they start really obsessing on them and letting them become very big in their minds, and you can try and place it in this sort of frame of normalcy. All people think about this to some extent. And the reality is that all of our bodies age and all of this and it calms down. And but what if? What if I do this?
Yeah, almost any one of these could really present as kind of just your normal client come into treatment for something,
Yeah,
right? But
absolutely.
then you really have to see how it's sticking around and how it's impacting them. But I think you all get the idea without having to dive into, the few other themes that are out there, what we're talking about here. These are the major ones, and people with OCD can definitely have different themes at different times in their lives. So remember, the obsessions can lie dormant, and then something triggers it to come out and up to the surface and start creating that doubt. And then it doesn't mean it has to be related or the same as the last time that they had the OCD pop up. Someone can start out with Harm OCD, and then years later, they start to struggle with Relationship OCD, even if they never had any relationship OCD with any prior relationship. So yeah, there are a few other themes out there, but I don't want it to just get monotonous at this point. These are really the main themes that we see in the clinical work.
We do have to take a moment to look at OCD and psychopathy in children, because there's a really interesting, thankfully very rare, but interesting overlap there. Because there is a well-known connection between anxiety disorders and antisocial behavior across different age groups. And in children, the rates of anxiety disorders among those with conduct disorder range from 22% to 33% in community samples, and then in 60 to 70% in clinical or institutional settings. So this link between anxiety and antisocial behavior isn't limited to formal diagnoses. There are significant correlations also that appear when using behavioral rating scales for children and personality inventories for adults. Furthermore, adults with antisocial personality disorder are at a higher risk for several different anxiety disorders, including OCD and panic disorder. So, of course, this connection presents as a challenge for researchers that focus in psychopathology. Some theories will suggest that a lack of fear or anxiety will predispose an individual to psychopathy and antisocial behavior. But the high levels of anxiety reported by some antisocial individuals just kind of throw a wrench into these theories, right? So to address this, researchers have proposed two distinct groups of antisocial individuals. The first group are known as primary psychopaths or under-socialized delinquents, and they exhibit low levels of anxiety. And the second group, called secondary psychopaths or neurotic delinquents, show high levels of anxiety. So research supports this distinction, indicating that these groups may very well have different underlying causes and characteristics. For instance, psychopathic individuals with low anxiety levels tend to perform worse on tasks measuring passive avoidance learning compared to those with high anxiety levels. That is fascinating to me.
Had we come across this research when we did our child psychopathy episode?
I don't think so,
No.
But it makes sense. I didn't find, this is an older paper that I went to. This is back from I would say the mid 90s. Mm-hmm. It doesn't, older doesn't necessarily mean that it's out of date, because those are some pretty significant community samples that we're looking at. But yeah, right. It just shows that we have to be really careful with what we're looking at that's presenting us in the room. Yeah. Because it may come from a number of different origins and a number of different situations, which of course, you and I just went to see Kevin Cameron, and he set a light bulb off for all of us, right? When we were talking about some of those actions.
As always. Yeah. So again, I would encourage people, if you haven't listened to our child psychopathy episode, to go back and listen to that. Because, we're talking about a very, very rare subsection of the minor population, but it's really interesting as we kind of stumble across these other things when we have overlapping topics that pop up here and there. So as far as treatment, so the gold standard for treatment with obsessive compulsive disorder is exposure and ritual prevention therapy, known as ERP. This therapy involves gradually exposing individuals to their triggers without allowing them to engage in their compulsions. Although it can be a really intense process, it has a very high success rate. So, think about trauma exposure therapy, right? And or even phobias, how we sort of treat phobias. That exposure can be really, really impactful. But we also use acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT therapy, which helps individuals develop strategies to diffuse unwanted thoughts, allowing them to observe these thoughts without becoming entangled. And this approach fosters a new way of relating to one's thoughts, putting the individual back in control. ACT also emphasizes clarifying personal values and can be integrated with exposure and ritual prevention through values-based exposures. ACT is great, can be used with a lot of different populations. And then there is inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy, also known as ICBT. It's a psychotherapy that focuses on the doubt aspects of OCD. It involves exploring self-trust along with additional cognitive behavioral interventions. ICBT is a newer treatment model compared to ERP and ACT for OCD, but it's rapidly gaining traction and focusing on that sort of self-doubt and learning to trust yourself again, I found has been really helpful, but also I'm a CBT person, so feels good and right to use that with a lot of my clients.
So there seemed to be a number of criminal cases in which the offender's defense was that they suffered from OCD and that their behavior was the result of a mental health disorder and therefore, quote unquote, not their fault.
Yeah, I also read case after case with the psychiatric, quote unquote, expert witness who was mixing up OCD and OCPD on the stand in trials of homicides where that person was the defendant was attempting to use it as their defense. I mean, it was kind of embarrassing to read about some of these experts they had gotten that really didn't even know what they were talking about themselves. Just because they have a doctorate in psychology doesn't mean you're an OCD specialist.
And I've seen, I have witnessed the other side of it where someone on the stand who is brought in as an expert witness is just having completely treated like crap, where they're saying, well, what do you know about this book? And, just like holding up book after book after book, trying to wear them down. And that's awful as well. But then the other side of it is here's someone that's conflating these two issues that, don't be a subject matter expert or get on a stand. And it's not only just about embarrassing yourself, it's about, someone's life hangs in the balance, right?
Yeah.
So here's an example where someone's defense team tried to be creative. Back in 2009, Ian McKinley, a father of three in Scotland, claimed that his large collection of child sex abuse images was due to his obsessive compulsive disorder. McKinley was caught using his credit card to access the images on various websites. During a police raid on his home, 3,557 illegal images were found on 2 of his computers. Side note, folks, Dr. Shiloh and I, in working together, were informed. We had clients who basically had 5, 6, 10 times that number of images on their computer. So this is a lot. I'm not minimizing what it is, but just to give you a picture of how big these types of collections can be. So the OCD Center of Los Angeles addressed these kind of defenses in a whole series of articles called OCD and the Law. And they are really actually a good breakdown and even have a touch of snark to them. So, of course, Dr. Shiloh and I love them. And they have this to say about the McKinley case.
Quote, first, there is absolutely no connection between compulsive pornography viewing and OCD. There are many problematic behaviors that have obsessive and compulsive components, yet are not the same as OCD, including anorexia, bulimia, compulsive overeating, compulsive gambling, compulsive shopping, compulsive shoplifting, drug addiction, alcoholism, sex addiction, and pedophilia. It is clear from news reports about this case that McKinley enjoyed looking at pictures of naked children. After all, he had collected over 3,500 pornographic pictures of children at the time of his arrest. This suggests pedophilia, not OCD, end quote. I 100%
mic drop.
Yeah, totally
Just
agree with
drop.
that. They go on to state that people with OCD do not act compulsively in an effort to, quote, escape from the pressures of reality, which I think is an excuse you and I heard over and over again. Many child sexual abuse image offenders claim that. Additionally, they even addressed pedophilia OCD by noting that that subtype of OCD in which people have unwanted sexual thoughts, including thoughts about children, is different. They say quote, but in cases where individuals with OCD have obsessions about children, they are uniformly disgusted by those thoughts, end quote.
Right. Perfect. Really well written and a great pushback.
Yeah, they break down a couple other cases and really just go back and forth of kind of pointing out why these are ridiculous defenses. It's just 2 articles. They did 2-parters, and they'll be on our website.
So in 2006, Robert Cameron Houston was just a 17-year-old, but he was soon to be one of the first juveniles sentenced to life without parole in the state of Utah. So he had a lengthy history of violent sexual assaults and was a patient at a youth sex offender treatment center. And on February 15th, 2006, Robert got a ride to his independent living home from one of the workers, 22-year-old Rochelle Elton. She gave him a ride home because it was snowing and she did not want him to have to walk 4 blocks in the bad weather. Robert later admitted to raping Miss Elton once they got to the home and then stabbing her multiple times. He also cut her throat and then tried to rip out her trachea in order to keep her from screaming. Houston then got into Miss Elton's car and sped off, crashing into a house in what he claimed was an attempt to kill himself.
During Robert's trial, Dr. Linda Gummo, an expert witness for the defense, testified that Robert's obsessive compulsive disorder was never properly diagnosed or treated. Since the crime occurred when he was 17, the death penalty was not an option, but the jury had to decide between life in prison without parole or 20 years to life with the possibility of parole. Dr. Gummo criticized the Youth Health Associates, where Robert spent 2 years, for inadequate supervision and inappropriate treatment. She highlighted that he needed a highly structured environment and specialized OCD treatment, but instead received unsuitable therapy that potentially worsened his condition. And as a side note, they never say what type or theme of OCD Robert had. Dr. Gummo, a neuropsychologist, noted that OCD is a genetic disorder that can be influenced by factors such as a dysfunctional family, which Robert had indeed experienced. She emphasized that with proper treatment, people with OCD can manage their symptoms. In contrast, the co-owner and clinical director of the facility disagreed with Gummo's diagnosis, stating he never observed OCD symptoms in Robert. It's really interesting because here we are, like, I wanted to hear more about like how this was supposedly related to his crime. But yeah, I mean, you certainly almost always see actions or compulsions or behaviors with OCD.
Yeah, that level of violence was just so extreme. That's just
Absolutely.
so incredibly extreme and impulsive. I mean, and like, there's just so many other things going on. OCD is not what I would go to. But again, that's what you do when you're a subject matter expert for the prosecution or for the defense, is that you are hired because you are willing to offer a particular perspective. And in a deal with prosecutors, Robert pleaded guilty to aggravated murder of Miss Elton, and the charges of aggravated sexual assault and rape were dropped. After a sentencing hearing, the jury voted 11-1 for a term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the teen who was tried as an adult. However, after he was sentenced, Houston retained a new lawyer who questioned the constitutionality of the term. The Utah Attorney General's office response was that the only mandatory life without parole sentences are cruel and unusual punishment, and that the punishment fit the vicious crime in this case. This matter went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court in 2018, and they declined to hear an appeal to address the question of whether it is always unconstitutional to sentence a juvenile to life without parole.
All right, so I wanted to do a case study example here that isn't criminal per se, and also, you know, kind of a crossover into the entertainment realm. But I thought this was a very serendipitous moment because we just had a wonderful conversation on our recent live stream back on June 29th with Dr. Joni Johnston about psychological autopsies. And we get an example of one here. So after the billionaire aviator, motion picture producer, and business tycoon Howard Hughes died, his estate asked former APA CEO Raymond D. Fowler to conduct a psychological autopsy to determine Hughes's mental and emotional condition in his last years and to help understand the origins of his mental health struggles. It was pretty well known that Howard Hughes suffered from OCD that impacted his daily functioning and really seemed to ramp up towards the end of his life. In his later years, he would lay naked in his bed in a dark hotel room that he considered to be a quote unquote germ-free zone. At times, he wore tissue boxes on his feet to protect them, and he even felt it necessary to burn his clothing if he had been near someone who was sick. It's hypothesized that his OCD was so severe that he began self-medicating with codeine, and he was becoming increasingly reclusive before he died from heart failure in 1976.
Dr. Fowler took a year to perform the standardized collection of data that is included in a psychological autopsy, but informally continued to gather information as it came forward over several years. Dr. Fowler determined that Howard Hughes had been a very isolated child with no friends, and as he aged, he became very concerned and fixated on his own health. His mother was constantly worried about her son's exposure to germs and was terrified of polio, which was a major threat at the time that Howard was growing up. His mother was very cautious and meticulous about what he ate every day and also checked his body for diseases on a regular basis. Dr. Fowler found that when Hughes was a teenager, he was paralyzed for several months, unable to walk, and there was no physical basis found. After a few months, the symptoms disappeared, and Dr. Fowler determined that it was likely psychologically based, signaling an early manifestation of his pattern of isolation and withdrawal in times of great distress. Dr. Fowler found instance after instance of how Hughes's fear of germs grew throughout his life. He even found a manual that Hughes had written for his staff on the correct way to open a can of fruit. It included instructions for removing the label, scrubbing the can down, and then washing it again and pouring the contents in a bowl in such a way to avoid touching the can to the bowl. He then even forced his compulsions on those around him, insisting that his staff wash their hands multiple times a day and wear layers of protection when they were dealing with his food. And I guess when you're a billionaire, this time in human history, and maybe even today, you can do that sort of thing.
Last night, my daughter wanted some mandarin oranges out of a can, and it's like all I could think about was Howard Hughes' ritual. I was definitely not abiding by that. So in the 2004 film, The Aviator, they portray him doing a number of behaviors that exhibit his OCD symptomology. He taps the phone lines and plants microphones to keep track of his girlfriend, Ava Gardner. He gets extremely upset and traumatized when the FBI searches his home and tracks dirt in, and is shown washing his hands until they bleed. So just a little crossover into our entertainment section, which is next.
Yeah, I think that was a great movie that showed what a genius he was. But It also, while acknowledging it, I don't think that they necessarily showed the progression. I mean, that's such an interesting set of factors that were involved, is that this didn't just emerge out of pure neurology. His mother was so terrified of infection.
Right.
You know, that is the transmission of anxiety disorders from parent to child, and which is not uncommon, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But there are other great media examples. One that I really like, which is, I'd have to watch it again to see how it ages.
True.
But I remember seeing it years ago and thinking that it was really great. And that is As Good as It Gets. And in this movie, Jack Nicholson brilliantly portrays Melvin Udall. And he's an eccentric and kind of from my standpoint, he's an asshole.
Yeah.
Who happens to have OCD. Like, there are people with OCD that aren't nasty like he is. But you also find out a little bit more about why he's nasty. So he has compulsive behaviors that disrupt his personal and professional life. And while the movie accurately portrays the chaos that can be caused by such a diagnosis, his eccentricities in this particular narrative will blur the line between quirky behavior and OCD. So they clearly depict Melvin's compulsions, his frequent social blunders, and his absolute emotional insensitivity that can be mistaken for OCD symptoms. Very early in the film, he throws a neighbor's dog into a trash chute, which I'm not saying that that's not a possibility, but they do it for sort of comic and shock effect, which is he is very insulting towards Jewish diners that he's eating out with or in the same area of. He makes a really cruel remark to the mother of a sick child, and then ends up dating that woman, Helen Hunt. And these behaviors are not typical of OCD, and they suggest other significant personality issues. So he has complete rigidity, cognitive inflexibility, and a lot of perfectionism. And those do align with obsessive compulsive personality disorder. And his social withdrawal hints at maybe some schizoid tendencies. And then he has this inflated self-importance because he is a very successful author of romance novels.
Oh, of course.
And those are, they are suggestive of narcissistic personality disorder. So he wears gloves in public to avoid germs. He brings his own wrapped plastic utensils to restaurants. And then when he gets home, he has this multi-step hand washing ritual with scalding hot water and a stack of new bars of soap. So he opens a bar of soap, uses it once, and then throws it away. And these behaviors are very, very accurate in their portrayal of an individual's intense fear of contamination and the compulsions that one would use to manage their anxiety. But of course, I mean, it's a Hollywood romantic comedy. So he has a waitress, and part of his obsession is going to the same restaurant and having the same waitress every day because this is who he knows. And it's an interesting turn of events. Like he's going, well, where is so-and-so? Where is she? Well, her son is sick and she can't afford insurance and she's home with them. So his solution to this is like, well, I'll pay for the doctor to get the kid treatment.
So she can be my server.
Right. And so he can be the server. And then they fall in love. But then it's a little bit more of a magical realism version of, but there is a really, really great line. There's a wonderful, wonderful line because he says to her, she notes one time during as their relationship is moving along, you seem to be doing better. And he says, my doctor has these pills I'm supposed to take and I don't like to take them, but I started taking them. Why'd you do that? Because you make me want to be a better man. Which is was like, oh, that is some good writing. That is really good.
Yeah. So he falls in love and it fixes his OCD. Just wait till that OCD pops up in a relationship theme and then he's screwed. No. Yeah, definitely a good one, and one I think most of us think of when we think of OCD depicted in films. I remember one of the first ones I saw that wasn't a theme throughout the whole show, like like Monk or something like that, campy depiction of it. But that was Girls on HBO, which was a show I watched like way after it was in its prime. I went through and watched it later. Yeah. So Girls is an American comedy drama. It's a television series that was created by and stars Lena Dunham, with Judd Apatow as the executive producer. And the show follows the lives of 4 young women living in New York City and is kind of inspired by Dunham's own experiences. That seems pretty obvious throughout. And she's just such a good writer. But key elements of the main character include things like financial independence from her parents, pursuing her writing career, making a lot of poor decisions, really have mirrored Dunham's own life, as she has said in a lot of interviews. And this series is recognized for its post-feminist commentary and its discussions on body politics and female sexual agency. I heard that it's like a thing again. People are going back and watching it again. So very good show. But Lena said that she did research for this on OCD presentations by studying sources from the International OCD Foundation. And it led to actually really rave reviews when professionals had gone back and watched it, because this really is just highlighted in one episode. Again, it's not a theme all throughout, but there's one particular episode where Hannah, Lena Dunham's character, has her OCD resurface. So Dr. Jeff Szymanski, the executive director of the International OCD Foundation and someone who lives with OCD, had very kind words to say. The episode that highlights a reemergence of her OCD is one in which her parents come to visit. And Dr. Szymanski applauds the expressions of the shame and humiliation and embarrassment that Lena's character is feeling as she sort of denies her symptoms are back when her parents start to see them. And he writes, quote, "Here's the thing. If you're really trying to understand someone's experience with OCD, you can't just look at what they're doing. For instance, what compulsive behaviors they're engaging in. For Hannah, it was doing things in numbers of 8. So he goes on to say, you need to understand why. And for this character, she has to complete tasks in multiples of 8, or she will feel incredibly anxious. And not just, oh, I feel anxious today, paralyzing, all-consuming, pervasive anxiety, end quote. He also said that he thought that the family dynamics that were depicted were pretty spot on, where the parents are both, feeling really helpless, but also there's like a lack of understanding to them. They know they can't fix it, but at some point they do know that they need to encourage her to get back into treatment, which is what happens. It was a really neat episode to see this portrayed in a really good way. We love really good portrayals of the disorders that we talk about. He did say my one criticism of it is that, sort of towards the end of the episode, she's on the subway clutching like a pharmacy bag with her new medications, as you're supposed to think. And he's like, medication is not a fix all for this sort of thing. You need to get back in.
That's a great point to
with
make.
a therapist, which they do. They show her going back to treatment. But yeah, just something that stuck out to me for sure. It's worth going back and watching the whole season or seasons, but that episode is really good. I'm sure you can just find the clip on YouTube. So
yeah, I would piggyback on that and say I highly recommend that entire series. In fact, now that you mentioned, I think I need to go back and watch it again, because it was really sort of a cultural watershed moment, because she is such a brilliant writer and was given this opportunity at a very young age.
Yes.
Because Judd Apatow, whether you like him or not, and I do like his work, I like his work a lot, he saw the brilliance in her and he saw the brilliance in this idea. And the show is very real and gritty. It can feel cartoonish, but to me, it was like the antithesis of Sex and the City.
Right.
Like Sex and the City gives everyone this completely unrealistic view of what living in New York is like. And I would say that like another one is Broad City, which is a very broad, almost sketch comedy level show about living in New York City, which is wonderful as well. But both of those shows share this real window into what young women's lives are. Like, stripped down without not like this idea of everybody being glamorous all the time. Totally. And these different personalities that interact with each other. And by the way, Lena Dunham was treated like absolute dog shit by the public. I mean, the dude bros came after her in nasty ways. I mean, it was bad, and there was a lot of controversy around it. And I think that hope that she feels like she has the final word or the final laugh on that, because that series is still very, very relevant to what a young woman's experience is. At least that's what's been reported to me by my clients that come in.
Sure. Yeah. One of my favorite episodes is I call it the Kitty Genovese episode, where to me, I was like, this has got to be the most fucking New York shit I've ever seen in my life. But basically there's I forget Adam Driver's character, he's studying to be an actor. And so his theater group is doing this live performance of what different people in the apartments around where Kitty Genovese was being murdered were doing, or what was reported to be. So you wander from room to room in this apartment, and you wander into these different scenes. So it's this live theater thing. And I'm like, this is so fucking New York. Of course, people are doing things like this, but kind of cool.
Right. Right. It is kind of cool. And we're not making fun of, Kitty's murder, because that is really sort of a watershed moment in psychology, and this sort of the bystander effect, which wasn't relevant in that particular situation, but it actually is a real thing. So it's very complex. But the idea, especially, there's so much, good theater has to have roots in people experimenting with doing things that are not good at all. Right. Like off Broadway.
Yes.
And that's a really great example. It's a cringeworthy experience.
Performance art.
Oh no. It's like going to you and I were so relieved when we went and saw Bryce's play. And it was like, oh my God, it's so good.
So good.
We're so glad it's so good.
Yes.
If it had been bad,
yes.
What do you do?
I know. Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe that's our summer watching, now that I'll go back and watch Curls now that I don't have Karen Reed trials to watch.
Okay, good.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you guys for bearing with us. I think, as I'm coming away from this, there isn't a lot of nexus between OCD and crime, and that's a great thing. And I think it's good that there are even some diagnoses we touch on that there isn't this big crossover all the time, or like we're trying to force a crossover in exploring this in our episodes. So it seems like we need to be a little bit more wary of people who are trying to use this as a defense.
That's what I think as well. I mean, I could certainly see there's some interesting like horror movies out there. There's one called May, which is really, really wonderful. And it's the idea that she has some of these elements, but there's also all these other things going on, all these other comorbid diagnoses, including psychosis.
Yeah.
So again, like you're saying, this may not have a direct nexus, but it's an interesting factor that could be looked at, but it's not going to be the driver. And certainly if anybody's thinking about using this as a defense, it's like, you probably need to rethink your defense strategy.
Yeah, for sure. Lastly, before we go, just make sure you guys check the show notes. We are kind of on the countdown now. I mean, it felt like CrimeCon UK and the Berkshire Podcast Festival was really far off, but we are inching closer and closer. So if you want to join us in September at CrimeCon UK, please make your arrangements. Click on our link in the show notes to get your discount with our code confidential. And then likewise in October will be the Berkshire's Podcast Festival. And you can also get a link and the code in our show notes to get a discount there as well. So I think with that, we're just planning out the rest of our episodes until then. Then we're going to be getting ready for our presentations. And it's going to be so great to see everyone in person again.
Absolutely. So folks, thanks for listening. And we will see you next time on LA
Not So
Confidential. Bye, folks.
Bye, guys. We sincerely thank you for spending some time with us today. LA Not So Confidential is part of the Crawlspace Media Network. Each episode is hosted, produced, and written by Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh. Our post-production editing and sweetening magic is handled by the multi-talented Jason Usry of Ear Cult Productions.
Our theme music, entitled Cool Vibes Film Noir, is composed and performed by the talented Kevin MacLeod. He graciously allows us to use his music via a Creative Commons Attribution license. Please check out all of Kevin's amazing work on YouTube.
All of the resources for each episode can be found on our website at la-not-so-confidential.com. You can find us on Instagram at LA Not So Podcast, on X at LA Not So Pod, and on Facebook at LA Not So Confidential. Media inquiries and bookings are scheduled at alienistentertainment@gmail.com.
Once a month, we go live on YouTube on Saturday afternoon. So pay attention to our social media announcements to join our interactive broadcast entitled Behind the Couch, where we interview guests on a number of psych, criminal justice, and true crime topics.
And lastly, we'd be honored if you joined our Patreon at patreon.com/LA Not So Podcast. With a subscription, you get an ad-free listening experience, additional content, host interaction, and you'll be the first to know about upcoming live events, social gatherings, and super cool swag.
Thanks for listening, and join us next time on LA
Not So
Confidential.